Okay. John Turner has been involved with numerous groups whose focus is on either open space preservation or environmental conservation. Mr. Turner was co-founder of the Long Island Pine Barrens Society, a group whose mission is to promote education, to advocate for the protection of Long Island's drinking water, and to preserve open spaces, especially in the Pine Barrens. As a spokesman for the Preserve Plum Island Coalition, Turner has also been active in trying to prevent Plum Island from being sold and developed. Today, John Turner will tell us about Long Island's cranberry industry, once one of the largest agricultural traditions in the country. Everybody, John Turner.
Thank you, Ellen. Hello, everybody. Nice to meet you remotely. Perhaps our paths will cross physically sometime in the future. What I'd like to do is to spend maybe half an hour, 35 minutes, running through a program I put together that focuses on the Long Island cranberry industry. So many people know about other important industries to Long Island. Of course, the aerospace industry. Remember Republic and Grumman at one time employed, I think, tens of thousands of Long Islanders. And in the agricultural sector, at one time, potatoes and Long Island ducks were a mainstay industry. They have largely been eclipsed by other types of activities, agricultural activities, as you know, mostly wineries, I would guess. But one that's not really appreciated, but at one time played a really prominent role in certainly the East End economy, is the cranberry industry. And make the point to you that during the latter part of the 19th century into the early part of the 20th century, Long Island was the third largest cranberry producing area in the entire country. Hard to believe that now, since there are no longer any cranberry operations that are existing. And so what I want to do is take you through the story about the lives of those that were involved in cranberry production, how bogs were made, and ultimately what led to the demise of the industry here on Long Island. What I'd like to do is maybe hold off on questions you have. Certainly happy to try to entertain questions you have or comments you want to make, but hold them off to the end if you could, so we're not constantly muting and unmuting, and then again try to answer everything that you may have in the way of questions. So what plant are we talking about? We talk about cranberries. What I've noticed is that a lot of people think that a cranberries that are the food that is produced comes from high bush cranberry, which is a plant that can grow 6 to 8 to 10 feet tall, and is found throughout the northern regions of our country. But in fact, that's not the case. Remarkably, the cranberries that you may know, in fact, if you buy them raw at a supermarket to make your own sauce, are the size of small grapes, and they grow on very modest little woody vines, which you can see in the photo in the upper right-hand corner. They belong to basically to the blueberry family, or the Vaccinium is the genus, which is a very large group of plants that include, again, several blueberry species that you can enjoy if you go out hiking in the wilds of Long Island. It includes other things like huckleberries, and then of course 2 species of cranberry. It was the large cranberry, not the small cranberry, which is a different species, that really became the plant that cultivars were generated from and were planted in these vines. Planted in the bogs by transplanting their vines. So again, it's the large cranberry, which is just a woody vine that can grow 6 to 8 inches long on the ground, never gets much height to it, that provides the cranberries that we enjoy so much. And in fact, in the lower right-hand corner, you can see that is a cranberry bog. It really has no dimension to it in terms of height. Everything there, the vines, the flowers that are produced, the berries, all take place within about 6 to 9 inches of the surface of the rather sandy soil. Well, where does the name cranberry come from, you may ask? I can see it on your faces. You're all thinking that. Uh, and the most commonly offered explanation has to do with they were once called craneberries. Now, why they were called craneberries, I've read two different answers. One is that sandhill cranes, which is a wading bird that, while very rare in New York, although they're starting to breed here, not on Long Island, but up in the northern part of the state, like to feed on cranberries in the box. So people would see them, cranes feeding on these berries and started calling them craneberries. The other derivation in name comes from the fact that the flowers, which you can see in the upper left-hand corner, very distinctive with their pink, we call recurved petals, look a bit like the head of a crane. That is the stamens or the male parts, and the petals themselves kind of look like a bird's head. So hence, craneberry came as a result of that. However you like it, they are now no longer called craneberry. The E got lost, and they're now called cranberries. Well, cranberries, well, certainly the Native Americans would go out to places where they were found growing wild and harvest them. Modern cranberry operations, or again, cranberry operations that existed on Long Island, didn't involve just people going out into the pine barrens and finding these low-lying areas. Or there's also, by the way, you can go, if you go out to Fire Island and some of the, what we call wetlands in the interdunal swales. That is, you've got, the dunes, and the dunes vary in height, and there's low-lying areas where the water table or the water reaches the surface. They can be really important little wetland areas. And I've seen sometimes thousands of cranberries grow naturally in those kind of situations. And those are the places where very likely Native Americans harvested cranberries. And cranberry were a staple to a number of Native American groups all throughout the northern United States. And in fact, you may know cranberry mixed with bear fat and other types of meat was called pemmican. And it was a staple food that Native Americans would have. And the cranberries being so astringent and having kind of antibiotic qualities would help prevent that the animal protein, the bear fat and the meat from going rancid. It lasts a lot longer. So the cranberries really had an important role to play, besides providing, vitamins and minerals as part of the overall food. But anyway, the industry as we know it now, again, with the cranberries that you would get at your local stores, are generated from commercial operations. And so on Long Island, the first cranberry industry operation began around 1840, 1842, and I'll show you a slide of where that was. And that was in the Sans Souci Lakes area in the town of Islip, near where if you know the famous Roosevelt Meadowcroft mansion is. That string of wetlands there appears to be the first one. And so what the kind of entrepreneurs on Long Island learned was from their friends in Cape Cod, which is where the cranberry industry, again, as a commercial enterprise, really began around 1810, 1812. They would find a low-lying wet area, and can't get away with this nowadays with all the environmentalists out there, but they would go into these wetlands, clear out all the shrubs, clear out all the plants, and get right down to the mineral soil, right down to the sand and the peat and the gravel. And you can see that the diagram in the upper left-hand corner, and would then plant the cranberry vines in that sandy bed that they've created. And again, right underneath that sandy bed is this layer of peat and gravel to help drainage. One of the key features to keep in mind that was, or foremost in mind, in trying to decide where a cranberry bog would be placed on Long Island was its proximity to surface water. Water is critically important. Cranberries are a wetland plant. They need to be wet. They also need to be protected. And so come the fall of the year, of course, when cranberries are maturing, everybody knows cranberries are harvested in the fall for our holidays, both Thanksgiving and Christmas. You're worried about, as they say, frost on the pumpkin, and they didn't want to have these cranberries just be exposed to freezing temperatures. And so what they would do is they would make sure that if it was a night where the cranberry operator thought or heard through the weather forecast that the weather may drop below, or the temperatures may drop below freezing, they would usher in huge volumes of water, flood the bogs, and put water over all of the cranberries. And the cranberries would therefore be protected. The water would be cold, but it wouldn't freeze. Because again, you can't have cranberries that would freeze and then thaw and freeze and thaw. The berries would get mushy, mealy, and would ultimately die. So it was really important to have a water source. And that's why you see the gentleman in the photograph that's courtesy of the Historical Society is standing next to a canal. Keep that in mind, because you'll be seeing some aerial photographs that show some cross-hatching of a bunch of canals. You can even see the remnants of a canal in the lower right-hand corner that's slumped in and long gone, that many decades ago was probably an area, little canal, probably 2 to 3 feet wide, that allowed for water to get into that section of the bog. The photo in the lower left-hand corner is a cement structure that exists out at Cranberry Bog County Nature Preserve. And what they, again, as technology evolved, quickly learned to be able to use diesel engines with paddle wheels to accelerate the flooding of the bogs to get water in there. They wouldn't just open up the bog by pulling out the wooden boards in the upper part of the bog and let the water come in, and then drop boards at the lower end, and then that would back up the water in the bog. But they would use diesel equipment. They'd use engines to really usher the water in much more rapidly. A key, of course, time of year is to harvest the cranberries. They flower in the spring, late spring, and you saw what those flowers look like. Again, those pretty pink, recurved petaled flowers. And if you ever go out to a cranberry bog, it's quite beautiful to see the millions or tens of millions of cranberry blossoms. And at first, when it came to harvest time in the fall, in each autumn, people would be on their knees, slumped over, developing bad backs, achy shoulders, and harvest cranberries. And I've done this a few times at this one bog out in Mandeville, and I can attest to it. After being in that position, and this is when I was younger, even that position for half an hour, you start getting pretty achy, and you have some appreciation for the work that these people were involved in. You see those photographs of about 80 to 100 years ago of people that are harvesting cranberries. A really novel way to ensure that the cranberries are harvested in a bog is shown by these string lines. And I just think this is so simplistic, but so ingenious. Make believe any one of you or each of you was a cranberry owner, a bog operator. You own the land, and your profitability really depended upon how many cranberries you harvested. Well, you didn't want to leave even 3, 4, 5% of the cranberries out on the bog. You really wanted to harvest pretty much everything. And so how do you help ensure that? Because don't forget, these people that are harvesting, mostly women, but some men, they're socializing, they're chatting away, probably gossiping, saying all the good things, talking about local politics or recipes or who knows what, right? And so if you didn't have some type of guidelines there, or guardrails with string guardrails, people would kind of wander and randomly move around and probably miss patches of cranberries, which again was a no-no. So it's a genius method of just laying down parallel string each person stays, or two people stay within that lane and just move down through the bog, thereby ensuring a pretty a complete harvest. And if you look at historical photos throughout the New England area of 80 to 100 years ago, almost all of them show these strings that I'm showing you here. So at first, again, the harvest was done by hand, literally picking each cranberry, and people were quite good at it. And then the cranberry scoop was invented, which was a step up in mechanization, I should say, of cranberry harvesting, and allowing for the cranberries to be harvested 3 to 4 times more efficiently than they were by hand picking. And those scoops, again, it started on Cape Cod. You can see the handle if you look at the middle diagram there with the wooden handle, and then you can see the tines on the scoop. Of course, those tines, the distance between each tine is slightly smaller than the diameter of a cranberry to ensure that cranberries don't often fall through the tines, and they would just go along and be able to just scoop along. A slight tugging by the scoop would just break the cranberry off the vine into the back, and then pretty rapidly harvest them. So hand picking gave way to the cranberry scoop, which then gave way to more advanced early mechanical harvesting using these kind of different type of anywhere from like aquatic weed whackers to these conveyor belts that agitate the vines and pull the cranberries off. Again, another step above, making it more efficient. And then nowadays, if you've seen any of those cranberry commercials by Ocean Spray, we learned very early that cranberries float, and that if you put in, again, almost like a much larger aquatic weed whackers to agitate the vines, a ripe cranberry will break off the vine and float to the top, and then they can be easily harvested. And so what once took armies of people, and a lot of Long Islanders were employed. This was a very, very important industry for hundreds of Long Islanders from about 1875 to the 1940s. Each fall, people would derive very significant seasonal income by going out and harvesting cranberries. That, of course, is a thing of the past. And nowadays, there's no bogs anywhere in the United States employ anything but this modern kind of mechanical approach, taking advantage of the floating nature of the cranberries. Here is a photo recently, and you really just see how it just takes, you could have half a dozen employees work in a 50 or 60 acre bog harvesting, 10,000 or 50,000 times more cranberries than it would take for people to do that by hand picking. And that is the method that's pretty much used today. There's vacuum sucking the cranberries up once they're captured by the booms, and bring them to up onto the conveyor belt and into these tanks to then be sorted and sterilized. I can tell you that one of the neat things that don't show here, but with the cranberry scoop harvesting as well as the hand-picked harvesting, there was equipment, and I know this from the Davis Bog out in Mandeville because I actually saw the piece of equipment, and it's still out, I think, there. That it was a conveyor belt with a little barrier, about a bunch of wooden barriers, about 2.5, 3 inches high, and at the top they would dump the pail of cranberries, and if you're a good cranberry, a healthy cranberry, right, you're really firm, you're going to easily be able to bounce over that 2 to 3 inch high wooden barrier and work your way down into the pail. But if it's a mushy cranberry, a rotten cranberry, it's not going to do that. That's what the method they used early on to separate the good cranberries from the bad. And that equipment is still available. And I'd love to see at some point this equipment to be renovated or restored by Suffolk County Historical, somebody, and actually on display. It would be kind of neat thing to see. So now I'm going to segue into to show you some of the early bogs. Again, Long Island was the 3rd largest cranberry producing area for a while. And uh, that's because there were uh, more than a dozen, between a dozen to 18, we're not exactly sure, maybe 14 to 18 um, major cranberry bogs that existed on Long Island. The biggest of them all was the famous Woodhull Bog in western Southampton. So you can see the photo in 1947 and then today, 2016. The Woodhull Bog is within Cranberry Bog County Nature Preserve. And if you want to really get a kind of more tangible, hands-on, um, connection to the cranberry industry, I would encourage you to go out and visit the park. It's a very popular preserve. A lot of people go hiking there, and you park right along the road. On the and on actually, if you look at that 2016 photo, the road to the south there, and you see that dirt road that coming down from the pond, you just park right there and walk in, and you can walk around that pond, and that's Sweezy's Pond. And remember I said before, water is very important. Well, that pond was the water supply source that was used to flood the Woodhull Bog when they needed to get water into the bog again come times when there'd be freezing temperatures. But if you look to the left, the 1947 photograph carefully, you can see the cross hatching. You can see the ditches, the transverse ditches throughout there that allowed again for water very easily to be ushered into those bogs, so that within a couple of minutes, or maybe half an hour, 45 minutes, no part of the bog would be dry. It would all be able to go underwater. So that's why they built these, again, the ditching in this kind of crosshatch fashion to make sure that water could quickly be able to get in to the bogs when we needed to do so. So the Woodhull Bog, as I mentioned, was really an important one, and goes to show you kind of what the production that occurred there. The bog actually was planted in 1885. They started work on it, I think, in 1881. So think about the back-breaking labor to take out all those native wetland shrubs and trees, things like red maples and white cedars and high bush blueberries and sweet pepper bush and all the native wetland plants. And then they had to, let me just go back, had to build earthen dams. And I didn't really say that, but surrounding each bog are these earthen dams to be able to give definition to the bog and hold in water. Well, that's sand from those earthen dams came from the surrounding area. And so that required, again, backbreaking labor. And if you go out to Cranberry Bog and walk around Sweezy's Pond in a counterclockwise fashion, let's say, you will soon come out to a flat area, and then you'll see a depression, a rather large depression, maybe about an eighth of an acre in size, like a little saucer-like area. And that is where the sand was dug out, excavated, and put on wheelbarrows to then brought out onto wooden planks to then create the earthen dams or dikes. Again, that gave the definition to the bog. So that those dikes, again, were necessary to hold the water to prevent it from kind of leaching out. So I think it was 1881. 4 years later, all that physical work was done and the bog was planted. Patience. It took, right? These vines are grown, they're planted, and they have to grow. They were fertilized to some extent, but the roots really had to be set in the vines. And it took a couple of years for that patience to pay off. And 4 years later, they had their first crop of a whopping 10 bushels of cranberries. And the operator, Richard Woodhull, probably was wondering, well, my God, what did I get myself into? All this work, and all I got was 10 bushels. Well, he was a patient man. In 1890, you can see the significant increase up to 90 bushels, then up 500 bushels. And then from 1892 right through to the 1940s, tens of thousands of bushels of cranberries each year came from that one bog. So it became a very, very, again, successful commercial bog made Woodhull rich, or wealthy, I should say. I mean, maybe not, but well-to-do, and again employing many Long Islanders on Eastern Long Island who went out and harvested the again the cranberries in the fall. So here's a view of Cranberry Bog County Nature Preserve that I'd encourage you some weekend day, come the fall. This is out in the Pine Barrens. It's an area that's been totally preserved. The lower right-hand view is Sweezy Pond, again, which was the water supply source for the bogs. And again, you can see, you will walk right past that concrete foundation there if you go, which again had the diesel engine mounted on it right next to the kind of the top of the bog. To get that water in, that's where they had that diesel engine to make sure they could do that. And it's just a very beautiful, pretty county property that each of us really we own, and so I'd encourage you to go out and enjoy it at some point. Again, I mentioned a lot of the bogs that existed on Long Island were found in the Pine Barrens. Not all of them, but most of them. And the reason why they were found in the Pine Barrens is because the conditions that cranberries like to grow in, and that is sterile, low nutrient, acidic water, a lot of sand, again, for their vines, those resources are available in abundance in the Pine Barrens. So another important cranberry bog that was about 2 miles away from the Woodhull bog was the Browns bog. And this is a bog, again, you can see the 1962 photo down low. This was a bog that actually was right along part of the Peconic River. You know, we've got the 4 major rivers on the island. Peconic is the one that flows east-west, drains, empties out in the town of Riverhead. And if you drive on the expressway, get off at exit 71, and instead of making the right, which would then take you to the Riverhead traffic circle after a mile or two by the county jail, all that, make a left, go under the expressway, and then the Peconic River will be on your left. If you look to your left upstream, that's where the Browns bog was. And you can still, if you walk a lot, I've done it, you can walk there and you can see remnants. You can see some concrete remnants there of the, again, the infrastructure that existed for that bog. So that was another important bog that existed. The last operating bog on Long Island was the famous Davis bog in Manorville. If anybody likes golf and has golfed at the Swan Lake golf course, which you can see in the left-hand photo, that green area with the sand traps and the fairways, that is where this bog was located, and it ran again until 1976. It was the last operating bog on Long Island. And if you look at the right-hand photo, which is, I did check, Ellen, it is a 1947 photo. I forgot to put in the dates, but it's the same year as the 1947 photo I showed you from Woodhull. You can see those, again, those rectangular areas. Those are the cranberry bogs. Those are each one of those has got tens of thousands of vines in them, again, looking down on it. And that area to the north at the top of the photo is the water supply source. That is the famous Swan Pond, or they call it Swan Lake for the golf course, but it's Swan Pond is the name of it. Swan Pond was the water supply source for that rather large cranberry operation. And that cranberry operation existed along one of the major tributaries to the Peconic River. The Peconic River has 4 major tributaries, all of which are protected. A lot of land's been acquired through the land open space programs by the county and the state and the federal government. We've been very active in trying to preserve the Pine Barrens. I'm delighted to say to you that today we have nearly 60,000 acres of preserved land out in the Pine Barrens. It is truly Long Island Central Park. And one of the places you can go out and explore are these bogs. And if you look again at that right-hand photograph, right at the very top, right where the pond meets the bog, you can see that kind of east-west trending sandy road, and then a north-south, little wider road. Right there is where they had the diesel engine and the little wooden house the diesel engine was in. Again, when they wanted to flood the bogs, they turn that on, crank it on, and get the water if into the bogs. You can see, I think, in the right-hand photo or even the left, you can see the stream that runs all the way down through. Off the photo is the main channel to the Peconic River. So this bog was about 3 miles west of the Browns Bog, which I just showed you, which is about 2 miles west of the Woodhull Bog that you saw. Okay. And the Davis Bog, again, was a the one bog that kind of lasted up until fairly recently, and they sold all their cranberries to A&P supermarkets throughout the New York metropolitan area. And when the county bought the land around that bog, I was with the county parks department at the time, and we got boxes filled, each one filled with many of these boxes, the Blue Diamond brand fresh cranberry boxes, folded up. And you can see, they were never used, of course, but you can see what the cranberries were packaged into. In the upper left-hand corner, I think you can make out it says packed for George W. Davis, Manorville, Long Island, New York. So I actually have a few of those boxes from those days. Those boxes are probably 50 to 60 years old. It's kind of neat. And there were other bogs along the Peconic River further west. In fact, the upper photograph, which is 1947, photograph 2, I believe, yeah, shows a Swan Pond, the extreme southern end of the Davis Bog on your right hand side of the photo, and then you can see to the left there is a right in this area here. I don't know if it's my cursor working. Can you see the cursor? So yeah. So you can see the
Working.
yeah, good. Okay, good. You can see the smaller bog that was created. So again, these cranberry bogs existed all throughout the Pine Barrens. The first three I showed you were the real large ones, and then again the oldest one, beginning in the 1840s. I want to say 1842. I think is this again one of Sans Souci Lakes in Sayville. Sans Souci Lakes is a county park, a nice place to go hiking as well if you're so interested. It's sandwiched kind of between Montauk Highway and Sunrise Highway, and you can see the chain of lakes here, particularly well shown in a 2016 photo. And you can see the earthen dams running across each one that were used to separate out the bogs at the time. They really wanted to have control. You need to have control of the water flowing through the bogs. And so again, the very first bog that we think every cranberry bog ever existed on Long Island was the one at Sans Souci. And then lastly, over in heading all the way east of Riverhead, just south, if you drive through the Riverhead traffic circle and continue on State Route 24, and you'll make your way ultimately down to Sunrise Highway, on your way on your right-hand side was an operating cranberry bog that also was a pretty productive, pretty prolific bog. And even in 2016, you can still make out the ditching that existed. Again, that ditching to provide the ability of water to flood rapidly when they need to do that in the bogs. Okay, so that's an overview of just some of the bogs that existed on Long Island. And as I mentioned before, no more. There's no existing cranberry industry on the island. And I can tell again, looking at your faces, you're wondering why. Why didn't this industry survive as part of our agricultural heritage? And it really is due to a series of reasons. Long Island always had trouble. The cranberry industry, even though it got pretty big, you still had relatively higher labor costs being in a more urban area. You had higher real estate values. The land, the property taxes were higher here than they were up in Cape Cod or rural parts of the New Jersey Pine Barrens where there's a lot of cranberry bogs, or Wisconsin where there's cranberry bogs, or Oregon. Really, it's New Jersey, Massachusetts, Oregon, and Wisconsin now that are the main cranberry producing parts of the country. And so we always had always behind the eight ball a little bit in terms of just operational costs. Again, the labor costs to pay people as well as the property costs. And so one by one, they kind of went out of business. And then a major event happened that you may be familiar with, um, took place in 1959. Again, as you very well know, cranberries are harvested mostly for Thanksgiving, right? To provide a staple at your Thanksgiving dinner. Well, unfortunately, right before Thanksgiving in 1959, there was a day called Cranberry Black Friday. And what happened was the Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare set off a food panic. One of the first food panics we've ever had, that cranberries were contaminated with a carcinogenic herbicide called aminotriazole. And that resulted in just a backlog of cranberries. A lot of people didn't, because the cranberries are so fresh, they hadn't even, to some extent, harvested the cranberries on their bogs yet. They were mostly underwater, keeping them, playing it by ear. And even those that were harvested, the transactions weren't fully made. Well, anyway, the market just dropped out that year in 1959, and the amount of cranberries that were eaten just with a significant drop off, even to the point that Mamie Eisenhower apparently made a public announcement saying that she was not going to have cranberry sauce that year, and she went with applesauce instead. And so that caused a few more of the bogs. It was just to go on. It was just a tipping point, and it was again a coup de grace for some of the bogs here on the island. It's kind of interesting that this happened because, as you probably know, you read about these issues once in a while. Pesticide contamination and herbicide contamination in food is still an issue. Our modern day agricultural industry nationwide uses so much, millions and millions of pounds of herbicides and pesticides every year. Something that's of great concern to environmentalists, and why a number of people have really moved towards organic foods. But anyway, back then, one of the very first scares tying herbicides and cancer with a food product was the aminotriazole. It was used to control one particular pest on on the cranberries. I did when I was researching cranberries many years ago. I actually went into different libraries and looked at their microfiche. I pulled up several articles in New York Times from 1959, and this was a story that ran repeatedly during that time in about a 3-week span. And it really was a remarkable back and forth, this controversy about the industry, how a number of the Long Island Farm Bureau and the American Farm Bureau was saying, these cranberries are perfectly safe to eat, while the Secretary Fleming said no, they weren't safe to eat, and again, most people did not eat them. So that's an overview. That's what I wanted to share with you in terms of kind of, shall we say, prepared remarks about the cranberry industry on Long Island, how it operated, what some of the bogs were. There was one, I can add one cranberry bog that was being contemplated in the 1980s to early 1990s by one of the well-known farming families on the North Fork, the Wickhams. They wanted to recreate a 2 to 3 acre cranberry bog and be able to provide local fresh cranberries to Long Islanders. But that never did happen. I spoke to some folks that are familiar. They did some clearing of the land, but it never did. They never did go to planting. So again, today there are no more operational bogs. You can go out and you can see the ghosts of the bogs. You can go out and get a flavor of it. You can see the ditching. You can see the sandy dikes. You can see the cement infrastructure to some extent, and get a sense of one time how important an industry this was. As well as, again, you can go out to these bogs and to wild areas, again, natural areas in the Pine Barrens, and as I mentioned on Fire Island, and you can harvest cranberries. One real quick story I'll tell you was that this was in, I think it was 1994. I had got to know some of the reporters from Newsday. I don't know if you remember, Newsday had this series that ran about nature on Long Island. They did a whole thing. They actually produced a book. And I knew one of their reporters quite well, and she wanted to do a story about cranberries and knew I was interested in it. So I took her out to the Davis Bog, but there's an eastern part of the Davis Bog called 7 Acre Bog that's detached. Anyway, I went with her. We harvested a bunch of cranberries, and I brought those cranberries home, and my wife made wonderful fresh cranberry sauce. And then 2 days later, of course, the best thing about Thanksgiving is the turkey sandwiches 2 days later, right? With the gravy and so I go into the Tupperware to take the cranberry sauce out to slather it onto my turkey sandwich, and it's covered in this fungus. The entire Tupperware was this gray spiderweb-like fungus, just underscoring again how today, appreciate with food preservatives, how long food can last. In just 2 days, obviously, when I was collecting the cranberries, had gotten a lot of fungal spores that just germinated, and the conditions in the refrigerator were just ideal. Plus the sugar, of course, you add sugar, right? Because the cranberries by themselves are too tart. So you had sugar to make the cranberries a little bit more delectable. Well, that sugar just fueled this fungal growth. And so suddenly I opened this up and got immediately grossed out by what I saw in front of me. Anyway, that's the presentation, and I'd be happy to try to answer any questions or respond to any comments anybody has. And thank you very much.
All right, I am now going to unmute everybody. So if you have questions for John, please feel free. If you prefer to put them in the chat box, feel free to do that as well. But I want to thank you, John. That was really interesting. And yeah, I'm glad I wasn't at your house for that Thanksgiving. That would have made me sad.
Yeah. Any questions?
Cranberries come from now?
Cranberries are now come from, again, commercial bog operations. There are really 4 states that are prolific in their production. Massachusetts, particularly southeastern Massachusetts, Plymouth County area. Kind of, if you picture Cape Cod, picture the shoulder of Cape Cod, if you will, that area. Southern New Jersey, the Jersey Pine Barrens, and then Wisconsin and Oregon. And all of those areas have similar soils, a lot of water, and just sandy soils that were laid down by past geological events, sometimes by the glacier that brought a lot of sand down from the north. So those are the 4 states today. If you going to enjoy cranberries in a couple, months on Thanksgiving, and be curious, you should look at the packaging if you buy the fresh ones, where they came from. I'd be surprised. Michigan also has a bit of a small cranberry industry, and I think Minnesota does too. But it's really, again, those 4 states that I think of: New Jersey, Massachusetts, Wisconsin, Oregon, is what I recall.
Thank you.
Sure.
Carl, you're unmuted. Your mic is probably not on from your computer, because you are not muted on my computer. So you want to check your own computer's mic. I don't know why. It's the mic on your computer, apparently. We can't hear you. So why don't you type whatever it is that you want to ask into the chat box, and we can respond to it. Because your computer mic is not working, apparently.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Obviously, this scare has passed because we've all been enjoying cranberries recently. So what has happened in the industry? Are they using a different pesticide or something more organic that's not carcinogenic? What's going on with that?
I think, from my understanding, is that the way they harvest cranberries now that they're underwater more, is that there was this fireworm that would get into the vines that was the problem. And that problem has largely gone away because they now run bogs, they operate bogs differently than they used to. So from what I understand, the cranberry industry isn't so reliant as it once was on using different type of both herbicides for weed control, but also pesticides for the control of these what they call these fireworms that used to be a pest they bore into the vines of the cranberries and basically kill the berries. So I don't think it's an issue the way it once was.
So we can all enjoy the cranberry sauce, right?
Yes, yes, you can. Yes, yeah.
I don't know why Carl is having difficulty with his microphone because I've unmuted everybody. And it says on the controls that everyone is unmuted. So I don't know.
I had to
Must be-
also press it on my computer.
What's that?
I also had, after you unmuted everybody, I had to press unmute on my computer.
Yeah, me too.
Did you?
So did I.
I guess when I unmuted everybody, it allowed you to run the option. But
Yeah.
everyone is unmuted by my controls.
Right.
I have no further controls in the ability to mute or unmute anybody.
Is there a chat box that people could?
Well, yeah, there is a chat box. I suggested that if Carl has a question that he might want to put into the chat box.
Okay.
Are you going to do that, Carl, or at some point I would like to know when to stop the recording, just because if we're just schmoozing back and forth, we don't have to put this up on YouTube. But again, I want to thank John for his presentation. I will stop the recording at this point. And
Okay.
thank you once again.